Like life at PDX, the Oregon Ducks football coaching staff has been experiencing some arrivals and departures. Will the arrival of Ross Douglas as the wide receivers coach maintain the status quo of elite play on the perimeter? The Ducks continue to set the pace on the recruiting trail in the class of 2026. Industry experts have Oregon leading for a 5-star quarterback and a 5-star offensive tackle that is also one of the top overall players in this cycle. This is TSOW. Welcome to That Show Out West for That Team Out West, an unbiased, neutral observer's view of Oregon Ducks football. I'm Ted LaRue, and I'm also really excited to kick off this show with a big announcement. This summer, I've got my official visit locked in to the state of Oregon. I am so excited for 2 weeks in August visiting the great state of Oregon. My wife and I, every single year, we love to go on an adventure out west. We like to go road tripping out west for a week or two. We've been to Utah, we've been to Colorado, we've been up in through Montana many times, up in Glacier, up in the Canadian Rockies, Yellowstone, you name it. Out west, we've been to almost every big national park type of area in the west. Last summer, we went up to the Pacific Northwest, got a taste of that in the state of Washington. I posted a video when I got back, and you all in the Duck fan base, you all in Duck Nation said, yeah, Washington's pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty nice. The Oregon coast, Crater Lake, our whole state, we take it to another level. And through my research, which I want to thank a lot of you out there, I put out a tweet on my Big Ten TED account that said, hey, looking to go to the state of Oregon, where are some places that I should really be aware of? And you all came up big with some great recommendations. So I certainly want to say thank you. Thank you for that. So the official visit is locked in. Mount Hood, heading to Eugene. Got to see what's going on campus, Autzen Stadium, and the facilities certainly out there. Going down to Crater Lake, coming up the Oregon coast, the Columbia River Gorge, and finishing up in the Wallowas on the way out of town. And I think I'm going to be feeling the excitement and the energy because this is going to be about 2 or 3 weeks before the Ducks kick off at Autzen Stadium against the Bobcats of Montana State. So I am beyond excited. Less than 6 months away, I will be stepping foot in the state of Oregon. And one last thing before we get into the football discussion, because I know that's what you all came here for, certainly today. I am hoping, now we like to, when we go out west and we take our trips, you know, we tent camp, we go into the wilderness, we go into the wild, so to speak, do a lot of hiking and, you know, try to be amongst ourselves in nature. Let's just put it that way. But I am hoping that we can schedule a meetup, Duck fans and myself, somewhere along this journey where we can get together for an hour or so and we can talk some Duck football, eat some great food, and love life in the state of Oregon. So more details on that hopefully coming up here in the near future. But my excitement level is at an all-time high for this summer. Now, this summer is a bit of an arrival and a departure for myself within the state of Oregon, but I will be arriving in August of 2025. Now, Let's switch gears. Let's talk some football, what you all came here for, and let's talk about some departures. You got players, of course, really good players that are departing this program from this 2024 team. 12 of them are going to be participating in the NFL Scouting Combine. That is an Oregon program record. And Oregon had the third most players in the Combine this year, behind only Ohio State and Texas. It is yet another example of the progression of Dan Lanning's Ducks to get to that elite level. We've seen the results on the field continue to improve year after year after year. We've seen recruiting, top 5 after top 5 class after top 5 class, and we're going to be talking about it a little bit later, but we know the level that the 2026 class is at now. One other part to being an elite level program is graduating a lot of talent every single year to the NFL draft, certainly right now. And I think Oregon, like last season, you could say this past season, really laid the groundwork of not only graduating a good amount of players to the NFL, but also those players having really good seasons at the professional ranks. Bo Nix and Troy Franklin, what they both did in the rookie years in Denver was really, really good. And then, of course, you got to go to Bucky Irving with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All Lanning era guys that, of course, peaked in the Dan Lanning era towards the end of their college careers. Do not, I repeat, do not let any of fans from other competing fan bases really drive home this narrative that I see sometimes in the Twitter machine. Oregon doesn't develop. They just pay a bunch of money to transfer players to come into the program. Now, Oregon certainly does go get some of the top-tier transfer portal players out there, but you look at Terrence Ferguson, Josh Connerly, Jeff Bossa, Jordan James were all recruited as Ducks, spent their entire career in Eugene, Oregon, and they're going to be really good NFL players. I think specifically Terrence Ferguson at tight end. Josh Connerly is going to be first round, maybe an early second round draft pick over there. And then Jordan James certainly at running back, I think are going to be very, very valued, I think, in this spring's NFL draft as well. And then you look at guys, we talked about transfers, guys that transferred into the program from lower level schools, but certainly I think their time at Oregon allowed them to step foot on the bigger stage and really show what they can do on a big stage. I'm talking Tez Johnson, I'm talking Ajani Cornelius, I'm talking Jordan Birch, and I'm talking Trayshawn Holden. They all got their opportunities in a big-time program like Oregon, and they certainly proved it, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do at the NFL level. Tez Johnson, at the Senior Bowl, folks were saying he was unguardable. And then I look at folks like Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell at defensive tackle, specifically Derek Harmon. But I think those guys did a lot this past years. I know they were just one-year guys in Eugene, Oregon, but I think both of those guys did a lot for their draft stock to really continue to lift up the draft board. I think that this class of Ducks is going to have a lot of really good NFL players, certainly. From a group of player departures to a singular coaching departure. Offensive analyst Mike Cavanaugh is leaving to go just a little bit north to Corvallis, Oregon. The offensive analyst, he was essentially the assistant offensive line coach for the Ducks the past 2 seasons, is leaving to be the head offensive line coach at Oregon State. He occupied that same position under Mike Riley from 2005 to 2014. And here's what I'll say first about the Beavs. I think Oregon State, yes, there was a little bit of shock and awe after what happened to the Pac-12. Jonathan Smith leaving. There was a lot of rubble kind of left over there from Oregon State. And I think last year certainly, obviously, didn't go their way. But I think this offseason, Trent Bray is kind of doing some better things now with Oregon State. You got Malik Murphy to transfer in there at quarterback from Duke. And, of course, you got Mike Cavanaugh coming back as the offensive line coach. When Oregon State has had good football teams, it's usually when they have a good offensive line, and bringing in a guy like Mike Cavanaugh is certainly going to help the Beavers. Oregon State comes to Autzen Stadium this season. But I will say this as it relates to the Ducks. What a blessing it was the last 2 seasons to have Mike Cavanaugh in this offensive line room. And these last 2 seasons, it was no mistake when you had Mike Cavanaugh coaching in this room. You also had back-to-back Joe Moore Award finalist. He is well-seasoned and well-experienced. And I think it was also a big deal to have him come in at the same time as Alik Terry. Alik Terry and Mike Cavanaugh were both hired prior to the 2023 season. Of course, Alik Terry, he was returning to Oregon. He was coaching under in the Mario Cristobal regime over there. So for a younger coach like Coach Terry to be able to learn from an experienced assistant coach like Mike Cavanaugh, I think it was no mistake that those two guys came together and the offensive line had the success that they did certainly the past 2 years. But now I think Coach Terry has certainly grown his wings. What he's doing on the recruiting trail right now and the development of this offensive line leading this room, it is time to fly, young man. And I think Terry is certainly doing that as a high-level assistant coach right now. Now, who is going to fill that spot left behind by Coach Cavanaugh? Right now, I really like Ryan Walk. Ryan Walk is a graduate assistant on this Oregon coaching staff right now, and usually you go from GA and you go to the next level to the analyst position. I think he's a great candidate. In-house promotions. I'm a big fan with when you have a GA or an analyst and you're promoting maybe from an analyst to a position coach like they did with Brian Michalowski. That turned out pretty well from an inside linebacker's perspective this past season. But Ryan Walk started 3 years at Oregon, a 3-time All Pac-12 offensive lineman. I think he would be a great candidate to take that next step up in the offensive line room. From a departure back to an arrival, and I think this is an arrival that a lot of people in Duck Nation should be very, very excited about. Another great young up-and-coming coach, a bright, shining star in the coaching profession, is joining the Ducks. Ross Douglas is going to be named the new wide receivers coach of this Oregon program following the departure of Junior Adams to the Dallas Cowboys. You know, when I saw this report kind of come through on late Saturday night, I thought, man, when Dan Lanning swings, he doesn't miss. Listen to this is what Fran Brown, the head coach at Syracuse, Ross Douglas was just the wide receivers coach and passing game coordinator at Syracuse this past year. This is what Fran Brown had to say before this past season. Quote, Ross is one of the young bright minds in college football. He'll be a great head coach one day. Those are kind of very similar words when a lot of people talk about Rashad Samples. And both of these guys are on this staff. This means, of course, that Rashad Samples is going to remain the running backs coach for this Oregon Ducks program. Now, what has Ross Douglas really done? He was with the New England Patriots before he came to Syracuse this past season. But, you know, he is young, very young in his coaching career. But, man, what he was able to do with this Syracuse offense last season, yeah, that certainly says a lot. The number one passing offense in the country, the Orange were, and Douglas served, as I said before, as the wide receivers coach and the passing game coordinator. 3 wide receivers had over 930 yards and 7 touchdowns last season. That's Arondé Gadsden, Trevor Pena, and Jackson Meeks. Jackson Meeks, there in upstate New York. Now, I mentioned you have 2 really good young coaches on this football team in Rashad Samples, in Ross Douglas. Junior Adams held the title of co-offensive coordinator, and of course that gets you to kind of be a bigger part of the game planning process with, of course, Will Stein as the main offensive coordinator. Where is Dan Lanning going to go as to kind of who holds the bigger responsibility? It makes sense on most coaching staffs to have the wide receivers coach hold that co-offensive coordinator title. Although with this hire being made at the wide receivers coach, there's a possibility that Rashad Samples could have that co-OC title. That's something to just keep in mind. I don't know how big of a deal in the end it really is. I don't think because of this move for Ross Douglas being the wide receivers coach, I don't think we're in danger. I know Texas has been thrown out there, and maybe they could poach Rashad Samples as their running backs coach, left the program in there as well. I feel very confident, and I feel very excited that you've got these two young studs in the coaching profession right now with Rashad Samples and Ross Douglas on your coaching staff right now. Like, these problems of like who's going to be the co-offensive coordinator, who's going to have a more involved voice in the game planning process. Look, there's no crying on the yacht. This is a we're standing on the yacht type of problem right now at Oregon. This is as good of a problem as you can have when you have this type of young coaching talent in your room and you got to decide who's going to have a bigger role. Both of these guys are going to have a role, certainly, on the development of this offense and just how good this offense can be next season. When I look at the profile of Ross Douglas right now, I think there's no doubt what he was able to do this past season at Syracuse. Look, I understand it's only one season, but if Dan goes out and he makes this hire, and I think this is a pretty convincing hire for Dan Lanning right now, I think that installs a lot of confidence. And I think I've got a lot of confidence in what Ross Douglas can do from an on-field coaching, developmental standpoint. We haven't really seen or he doesn't really have a significant track record just because, he's a very young football coach of what he can do from a recruiting standpoint. Like before the 1 year at Syracuse, he was in the NFL with the New England Patriots. So I'm very curious to see what prowess he is going to have in that regard. But here's the thing on this Oregon staff when it comes to a recruiting standpoint, and you're losing a great recruiter in Junior Adams. But maybe this is an opportunity for Rashad Samples to have an elevated recruiting role that went beyond what he had on this staff previously when Junior Adams had an increased recruiting role alongside Rashad Samples certainly as well. You combine the recruiting prowess of Rashad Samples with that of the development on the field coaching and the potential of someone like Ross Douglas, that could be a combination for a great passing attack going forward for the Oregon Ducks. I really like this hire and what Dan Lanning was able to do here. We are going to wrap up this edition of That Show Out West talking about that ever-popular, that ever-growing elite level 2026 recruiting class. And we are talking about a 5-star quarterback and a 5-star offensive tackle. Well, that's a great combination. You love to have 5 stars, certainly at those two positions. But according to On3's Steve Wiltfong, the Oregon Ducks lead for both of these guys. Specifically, here's what he had to say about quarterback Jared Curtis out of the Nashville, Tennessee area.
I think he likes Oregon the most.
Wow.
So I am predicting him to land with Oregon. They already have the nation's #1 ranked recruiting class per the On3 industry. And I think as it stands right now, they are setting the tone for Jared Curtis. And Curtis has been to his top schools numerous times. With all the head coaches that came and visited him this past month and all the conversations he's having with his family and representation, I wouldn't be surprised if he came off the board sooner rather than later.
I've talked about Jared Curtis's skill set on this show before. Big, strong arm, can make every throw on the football field, fairly mobile, all the things that you would expect, certainly, from a 5-star quarterback. But this creates a little bit of an interesting situation going forward for the Oregon Ducks if they are indeed able to land Jared Curtis. The quarterback room post Dante Moore becomes very, very intriguing. Once again, this is a no crying on the yacht type of situation. When I can list off of these quarterback talents and you can plan ahead maybe this far, I tend to project that Dante Moore is going to be here for 2 seasons. So when you can project this far ahead with this type of talent, That's a great problem to have, certainly right now, but it still is very intriguing, certainly, to talk about. You got Achilles Smith Jr. within this class. In the class of 2026, you also have Jonas Williams, who I believe visited USC fairly recently as well. I don't think when we get to 2026, I don't think you're going to have Achilles Smith Jr., Jonas Williams, and Jared Curtis all on the roster. I think it's an either-or type of situation with Jonas Williams and Jared Curtis. When I look at all three of those quarterbacks and I look at the film out of all of them, I think Jared Curtis is the most talented. I think Jared Curtis has the highest ceiling out of all of these quarterbacks. Jonas Williams is still a really good quarterback, and he's got a very talented skill set, certainly. So this is a great problem to have, as I said before, but if they can land one of the top most coveted quarterback prospects of this class and maybe follow up Dante Moore with Jared Curtis, they'll be sitting pretty and they'll be loving life on the yacht. I can certainly say that. I would not be surprised if Jared Curtis ends up in Eugene, that Jonas Williams flips at some point as well. Let's go to the offensive line. And boy, Oregon is really building up a championship-level offensive line. There are two players, number 1 and number 2, in the class of 2026 overall rankings that are offensive tackles. Jackson Cantwell is the number 1 player out of the state of Missouri. Fun fact, Oregon is in his top 6, his final 6 right now. The other one is Immanuel Iheanacho, 6'7", 325 pounds. He is an absolute monster. And you guessed it, here's Steve Wiltfong talking about the Ducks leading the way.
No change in his leaders. The same thing he said in January at the Under Armour All-America game. Oregon's out in front. Mm-hmm. Georgia's right there. Georgia, right. Penn State, Oregon, Bama, Maryland is the 5 officials, with LSU, Miami, Florida, and Texas A&M. He's going to take 6 officials, so those are 4. Now, we all know that all that stuff's fluid. So maybe 2 of those schools move into the 6 officials, and maybe one of the 5 that he has marked down for an official gets moved out. So we'll see how he continues through his process, but the Ducks lead.
All right, we talked about this offensive line haul, and we kind of teased it coming into this thing, but this year, Zaire Anderson and Douglas Utu in the 2025 class, and I really like both of those freshmen right now. And then you got Cody Green, who's committed in the class of 2026, and potentially Emmanuel Iheanacho certainly as well. Jackson Cantwell is around. I think it's going to be a little bit of a stretch. Like, that would be complete insanity if they can land the number 1 and number 2 offensive tackles and players in this 2026 class. I don't think that's going to happen. They both play the same position. I'd probably say it's an either-or certainly type of situation. But when you start to stack offensive line talent on offensive line talent at this level of play, that's what championship teams are made out of. This type of talent on the offensive line, these types of guys that can just flat out push other people around. Iheanacho right now, he has a great burst off the football. He is extremely quick and explosive as a run blocker, considering his size at 325 pounds. When it comes to his pass blocking ability, he has long arms. The 24/7 Sports scouting report said he had some of the longest arms in this class. Great length to certainly keep his distance into pass blocking situations. I know a lot of people are going to want to know, if we only can get Iheanacho or Cantwell, which one would we rather have? Boy, it's really tough to choose. So Iheanacho is about 20 pounds heavier right now than Cantwell. Cantwell is also standing at 6'8". He's right in there at 300 pounds. When I look at Jackson, he is one mean SOB, and he is very athletic, and his elite strength is certainly on full display as well. I'll put it this way. You can't go wrong with either option. You're sitting just fine, I think, with either option right now. But the thing that I love about what Oregon is doing specifically in these last two classes, they are building an elite level offensive line. And that right there is what is going to build you potentially a national championship type of football team. All right, that should do it. That is going to do it for another edition of That Show Out West. Leave all your thoughts on all of these things in the comments below. Let the countdown begin. I cannot wait to step foot in the state of Oregon. So, until next time, I'm Ted LaRue. This has been That Show Out West.